It was a cloudy Wednesday afternoon in downtown Chicago. The air was heavy with the smell of rain, and traffic crawled along the narrow streets. Officer Ryan Callahan had just finished his lunch break and was back on patrol. He adjusted his radio and sipped his coffee, keeping a watchful eye on the passing cars. His day had been uneventful so far, just the usual noise complaints and minor traffic violations. That was about to change. A sleek black SUV rolled past him, moving slightly over the speed limit. Ryan narrowed his eyes and decided to follow it. The car's tinted windows made it impossible to see who was inside. His instincts kicked in. Something about the vehicle felt off, perhaps the way it slowed down when it passed his patrol car. He hit the lights. The SUV pulled over to the side of the road near a quiet residential block. Ryan stepped out of his car, adjusting his utility belt. He approached the driver's side window with practiced caution. The window rolled down, revealing a black man in his mid-30s, wearing a tailored gray suit and a calm but slightly annoyed expression. "Afternoon, officer," the man said, his voice steady. "Is there a problem?" "License and registration, please," Ryan said, ignoring the question. His eyes flicked to the back seat, scanning for anything suspicious. The man sighed, reached into his glove compartment, and handed over the requested documents. Ryan studied the driver's license. Nathaniel Carter. The name didn't ring a bell, but something about it tickled the back of his mind. He glanced at the registration and frowned. The car was registered to the federal government. "Mind telling me where you're headed, Mr. Carter?" Ryan asked, his tone cool. "I'm on official business," Nathaniel replied, leaning back in his seat. "I'm a federal agent." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? What agency?" "The FBI," Nathaniel said, pulling out his badge and holding it up. It gleamed under the fading afternoon light. Ryan examined the badge carefully. It looked legitimate, but he wasn't about to take it at face value. He'd heard stories of people flashing fake federal IDs to avoid trouble. His radio crackled, and he stepped away from the car to call it in. "This is Officer Callahan, badge number 4531. I need verification on an FBI agent named Nathaniel Carter," he said into the radio. There was a long pause. The dispatcher finally responded, "Stand by, officer." Ryan tapped his fingers on his belt, watching Nathaniel through the window. The man remained calm, scrolling through his phone as if he had all the time in the world. Minutes passed. Then the radio crackled again. "Officer Callahan, confirm the badge number and agent's name again," the dispatcher said. Ryan repeated the information. Another pause. Then, confirmed. "Nathaniel Carter is a special agent with the FBI, Chicago Division. He's authorized for undercover operations. Proceed with caution, he's one of ours." Ryan's stomach dropped. His face flushed with embarrassment as he realized what had just happened. He walked back to the car, clearing his throat. Mr. Carter, I appreciate your cooperation." "Looks like everything checks out," Ryan said, handing back the documents. "Sorry for the inconvenience." Nathaniel gave him a tight smile. "No problem, Officer Callahan. You were just doing your job. But next time, maybe trust the badge a little faster, huh?" Ryan nodded sheepishly. "Of course. Thank you for your service, sir." Nathaniel chuckled and rolled up his window. The SUV pulled back onto the street and disappeared around the corner. Ryan stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of what had just happened. His heart was still racing, but not from fear, more from the realization of how easily things could have gone wrong. As he walked back to his patrol car, he made a mental note to be more careful in the future. Not every situation was as straightforward as it seemed at first glance. In the distance, the first raindrops began to fall, washing the tension out of the air. Ryan sat in his patrol car for a moment, replaying the encounter in his head. His hands still tingled with adrenaline, but his mind was already filled with questions. What kind of undercover operation would have an FBI agent driving a government vehicle in broad daylight? Something didn't add up. He picked up his radio and called dispatch again. "Dispatch, this is Officer Callahan. Could you tell me if Special Agent Carter has any active operations in this area?" The line crackled. "Negative, Officer Callahan. No current operations reported under his name." "Why? Do you need backup?" Ryan hesitated. "No backup needed. Just stay on standby." He put down the radio and looked in the direction the SUV had gone. His instincts, the same ones that told him to pull the vehicle over in the first place, were nagging at him. What if this isn't over? Without thinking too much, Ryan decided to follow the SUV from a distance. He kept his lights off and maintained several car lengths behind. The SUV made a few turns, weaving through the city streets until it entered a warehouse district on the outskirts of town. The area was quiet, too quiet. Rusting shipping containers and crumbling brick buildings lined the streets. The SUV slowed down, then turned into the parking lot of an old factory. Ryan pulled over and parked a block away. He grabbed his binoculars from the glove compartment and peered through them. Nathaniel Carter stepped out of the SUV and adjusted his suit jacket. He looked around, making sure the coast was clear, then headed toward a side entrance of the factory. Ryan's pulse quickened. What the hell is an FBI agent doing out here alone? He reached for his radio, then thought better of it. If this was some kind of sensitive undercover operation, calling for backup might blow everything. He decided to check it out himself. Grabbing his flashlight, Ryan moved quickly and quietly across the street. He stuck to the shadows, keeping his footsteps light on the damp pavement. When he reached the factory's side door, he pressed his ear against it. He could hear muffled voices inside, 2, maybe 3 people. Ryan drew his service weapon and carefully pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The factory was dark, the air thick with the smell of oil and mildew. His eyes adjusted to the gloom, and he saw Nathaniel standing in the center of the room, talking to 2 men in dark jackets. One of the men handed Nathaniel a black duffel bag. "That's all of it," the man said in a gravelly voice. "You've got what you need. Now hold up your end of the deal." Nathaniel nodded. "Relax. You'll get your payment once the job is done." Ryan's stomach twisted. This doesn't look like an FBI operation at all. The other man, a tall figure with a scar running down his cheek, suddenly glanced toward the door. "Hey! Who's there?" Ryan froze, his heart pounding. His cover was blown. Nathaniel spun around, his eyes locking onto Ryan. For a split second, something unspoken passed between them. Then Nathaniel acted fast. "Officer Callahan!" Nathaniel called out, raising his hands in mock surprise. "Perfect timing." He turned back to the other men. "Gentlemen, this is our police escort. Everything's under control." The 2 men looked suspicious, their eyes darting between Nathaniel and Ryan. Ryan didn't lower his weapon. "What's going on here, Carter?" Nathaniel gave him a tight smile. "Just a little business arrangement. Nothing illegal, I assure you. These men are informants. We're exchanging information." Ryan wasn't buying it. Then why didn't you mention that earlier? Nathaniel stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Ryan could hear. Listen, Officer Callahan, you've stumbled into something bigger than you realize. These guys are dangerous, and if we don't play this right, people are going to get hurt. Trust me, just follow my lead. Ryan's instincts were screaming at him to arrest everyone on the spot, but something in Nathaniel's eyes stopped him. Fine, Ryan said, holstering his weapon but keeping his hand close to it. But we're going to have a long conversation once this is over. Nathaniel nodded. Fair enough. He turned back to the men. Gentlemen, I'll be in touch soon. We're done here. The two men exchanged wary glances but ultimately walked out, disappearing into the shadows. Nathaniel waited until the sound of their footsteps faded, then let out a breath he'd been holding. That was close, he said, running a hand through his hair. Ryan crossed his arms. Start talking. Now. Nathaniel looked around to make sure they were alone. You're not going to like what I'm about to tell you. I already don't like it, Ryan shot back. Nathaniel smirked. Fair point. All right, here's the deal. I'm part of an internal task force investigating corruption within the Bureau. Those men? They're part of a smuggling ring with connections deep inside law enforcement. I'm trying to take them down from the inside. Ryan's jaw tightened. And you didn't think to loop in the local police? I couldn't risk it, Nathaniel said. Not until I knew who I could trust. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Finally, Ryan nodded. All right. I'll help you, he said. But we do this by the book from now on. No more secrets. Nathaniel extended his hand. Deal. Ryan shook it. Let's take these guys down. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder. Nathaniel smiled. Looks like things are about to get interesting. The sirens grew louder, their wailing cutting through the eerie quiet of the abandoned factory district. Ryan glanced at Nathaniel, his brow furrowed. You called backup? Nathaniel shook his head. Not me. They're not here for us. Something else is going down. Ryan stepped outside the factory just in time to see several unmarked SUVs racing down the street, their lights flashing blue and red. They screeched to a halt at the far end of the block. Men in tactical gear poured out, weapons at the ready. Federal Task Force, Nathaniel muttered, his jaw tightening. They're early. This operation wasn't supposed to go down for another week. Then why are they here? Ryan asked. Nathaniel looked grim. Somebody tipped them off. And if they storm this place now, they'll blow everything, and those smugglers will vanish for good. Ryan's mind raced. So, what do we do? Nathaniel glanced at him, his eyes sharp with determination. We stall them. Before Ryan could respond, the task force commander, a burly man with a buzz cut and a bulletproof vest labeled FBI, approached with his team close behind. Special Agent Carter, the commander barked, his eyes narrowing. What the hell are you doing here? This area is under lockdown for a federal operation. Nathaniel forced a calm smile. Commander Davis. Nice to see you. I wasn't aware we were moving this quickly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I had things under control. My cover is still intact. You might want to hold off on kicking the door in. Davis crossed his arms. We've received intel that the smugglers are making a major shipment tonight. High-priority contraband. We're taking them down, now. Nathaniel's eyes flicked to Ryan for a brief second, then back to Davis. I understand. But trust me on this, if you move too soon, you'll scare them off. We can catch them red-handed if you give me 24 more hours. Davis considered this for a moment, then shook his head. Can't risk it. The director wants results. We're going in. Nathaniel's calm facade cracked, and his voice dropped an octave. If you go in now, you're going to compromise months of undercover work. These guys are smart. They have people watching. The second they see your team, they'll be gone, and you'll never find them again. Davis hesitated. For a split second, Ryan thought the commander might listen. But then a voice crackled over the radio. Team Bravo, this is Recon. We've got movement inside the target building. Possible suspects on site. That's it, Davis said, raising his hand. We're going in. Nathaniel cursed under his breath, then turned to Ryan. You still want to help me? Ryan nodded. Let's do it. Follow my lead, Nathaniel said. As the task force prepared to breach the building, Nathaniel and Ryan slipped back inside through the side entrance. Nathaniel moved quickly, leading Ryan toward a dark staircase that descended into the factory's basement. We need to get to the server room, Nathaniel explained as they moved. The smugglers store all their transaction records down there. If we can grab that data before the task force barges in, we'll have enough evidence to convict every single one of them. They reached the basement door. It was locked. Cover me, Nathaniel said, pulling out a small set of lockpicking tools from his pocket. He worked quickly, his fingers moving with practiced precision. Ryan stood guard, his weapon drawn. His ears strained for any sign of movement. His pulse quickened with every second that passed. Got it, Nathaniel whispered as the lock clicked open. They stepped into the server room. Rows of humming servers lined the walls, their blinking lights casting an eerie glow. Nathaniel moved to the nearest terminal and began typing furiously. Keep an eye on the door, he said. This will take a few minutes. Ryan nodded, his eyes darting between the hallway and Nathaniel. The tension was suffocating. Every creak of the building, every distant footstep made his finger tighten on the trigger. Hurry up, Ryan muttered. I'm working on it, Nathaniel replied, his eyes glued to the screen. Almost there. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the factory. The task force had breached the main entrance. The sound of shouting and heavy footsteps grew louder, closing in fast. Nathaniel cursed. They're moving too quickly. I need 30 more seconds. Ryan took a deep breath, stepping into the hallway. I'll buy you some time. He moved toward the main stairwell, raising his hands as he approached the task force. Hold your fire, he called out. Officer Callahan, Chicago PD. Agent Carter and I are securing critical evidence downstairs. Commander Davis appeared at the top of the stairs, his eyes narrowing. What the hell are you doing down here? Making sure this operation isn't a complete disaster, Ryan shot back. Agent Carter is downloading the smugglers' transaction records. If you storm in without that, they'll walk free. Davis opened his mouth to respond, but Nathaniel appeared behind Ryan, holding up a USB drive. Got it. Ryan gave a satisfied nod. Now we can take them down. Nathaniel held the USB drive tightly, his eyes sharp with determination. This is everything we need: transaction records, contact lists, even communications with their buyers. It's game over for these guys. Commander Davis hesitated, clearly processing the situation. Fine, he said, nodding slowly. We'll extract the data and... Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from outside the factory, followed by shouts from the task force. Gunfire. Ambush, someone yelled over the radio. The factory erupted into chaos. Task force agents scattered for cover as several masked men armed with automatic rifles emerged from the shadows outside. Bullets ricocheted off the walls, shattering windows and filling the air with smoke and dust. Ryan hit the ground, drawing his weapon. What the hell is going on? Nathaniel clenched his jaw. The smugglers knew we were coming. They're trying to destroy the evidence and escape. He shoved the USB drive into his pocket. We need to get out of here before they take this place apart. Commander Davis barked orders into his radio, trying to regain control of the situation. Team Alpha, suppressive fire on the west side. Team Bravo, secure the perimeter. Nathaniel grabbed Ryan's arm. Forget the perimeter. Follow me. They darted down a side hallway, staying low to avoid the gunfire. The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Explosions rocked the factory as several crates of smuggled contraband went up in flames. Nathaniel led Ryan toward a loading bay at the back of the building. The door was partially open, revealing a narrow alleyway. This way, Nathaniel said, motioning for Ryan to follow. But just as they reached the door, a figure stepped out of the shadows, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek. The same man from earlier. You really thought you could take us down that easily? The man sneered, aiming a pistol at Nathaniel's chest. Nathaniel froze, his eyes locked on the man. You don't have to do this, he said calmly. It's over. We have all the evidence we need. Walk away, and you might still have a chance in court. The man laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Court? No thanks. I've been in this business too long to end up behind bars. I'd rather take my chances here. Ryan raised his gun. Drop the weapon. Now. For a moment, everything hung in the balance. The man's finger tightened on the trigger. Ryan could see it happening in slow motion. Then, bang! The man crumpled to the ground, clutching his leg. Nathaniel had drawn his backup pistol and fired in one swift motion, hitting the man just above the knee. I told you, Nathaniel said, stepping over the wounded smuggler. It's over. Ryan exhaled, his heart pounding. Nice shot. Nathaniel smirked. Thanks. Let's get the hell out of here. They hurried into the alleyway just as the task force regained control of the factory. Sirens wailed in the distance as additional backup arrived, local police, ambulances, and fire trucks. Nathaniel and Ryan stopped at the end of the alley, catching their breath. You saved my life back there, Nathaniel said, extending his hand. I owe you one. Ryan shook his hand firmly. We're even. Just promise me one thing, next time you're working undercover in my city, give me a heads up. Nathaniel chuckled. Deal. He pulled the USB drive from his pocket and held it up. Time to take this back to the bureau and wrap this thing up for good. Ryan nodded. You'll have quite a story to tell. Nathaniel grinned. Yeah. And it's just getting started. As the first rays of dawn broke over the city, Ryan watched Nathaniel disappear into the chaos of flashing lights and sirens. He knew he'd probably never see the agent again, at least not under normal circumstances. But one thing was certain, their paths would cross again. And when they did, Ryan would be ready. Epilogue, Shadows Run Deep. A week had passed since the raid on the factory. Ryan sat at his desk at the precinct, sipping his coffee and scrolling through the latest news. The headlines were everywhere. Massive smuggling operation busted, FBI claims major victory. Corruption in federal agencies? FBI tight-lipped about ongoing investigation. Unidentified suspects still at large in multi-million-dollar case. Ryan couldn't help but feel uneasy. Something about the whole situation nagged at him. Sure, they had arrested several smugglers that night, but many key players had slipped away. And no one seemed to know how the ambush had happened in the first place. Had someone inside tipped them off? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. He looked up to see Nathaniel Carter standing in the doorway, his expression serious. Gone was the calm, collected man from their first meeting. Nathaniel looked tense, like a man carrying a heavy burden. "Agent Carter," Ryan said, surprised. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon." Nathaniel shut the door behind him and lowered his voice. "We need to talk. It's important." Ryan leaned back in his chair. "What's going on?" Nathaniel tossed a thick folder onto the desk. "This investigation isn't over. In fact, it's barely started." Ryan opened the folder and scanned the documents inside. There were photos of high-ranking officials, financial records, and detailed notes about hidden offshore accounts. His eyes widened. "Wait a second, these names, half of them are law enforcement, politicians, even federal agents." "Are you saying—" "Yes," Nathaniel interrupted. "The smuggling ring is just the tip of the iceberg. We've uncovered evidence of a deep network of corruption that stretches far beyond what we thought. Some of the people involved are powerful, very powerful. They've been protecting the operation for years." Ryan whistled softly, closing the folder. "So, what's the plan?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I'm putting together a covert team, people I can trust, outside the usual chain of command. I want you on that team." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Me? Why?" "Because you're not afraid to follow your instincts, even when it means going against the grain. And, more importantly, you've already seen how deep this goes. I can't do this alone." Ryan tapped his fingers on the desk, thinking it over. He'd always believed in doing the right thing, even when it was dangerous. But this was a whole new level. "If I say yes," Ryan said, "what exactly are we getting into?" Nathaniel smiled faintly, but there was no humor in his eyes. "The kind of case that could change everything, or get us both killed." For a long moment, Ryan said nothing. Then he stood up, grabbed his jacket, and extended his hand. "Count me in." Nathaniel shook it firmly. "Good. We start tomorrow." As Nathaniel left, Ryan glanced back at the folder on his desk. His pulse quickened. This was no ordinary case, it was a fight for the soul of the justice system itself. He smiled to himself. Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Conclusion: the thin line. The city was quiet again, at least on the surface. The news cycle had moved on, celebrating the FBI's so-called victory, while the deeper truth remained hidden beneath layers of deception and shadowy deals. For Officer Ryan Callahan, life returned to its usual rhythm, patrolling the streets, writing reports, and chasing the occasional petty criminal. But something inside him had changed. He couldn't shake the feeling that the case was far from over. He thought about Nathaniel Carter often, wondering what the agent was up to. How deep did the corruption go? How many more names were on that list, waiting to be exposed? He knew the answers wouldn't come easily. They never did in cases like this. But Ryan wasn't afraid. He'd learned something valuable during that chaotic night. Sometimes the line between right and wrong is razor thin, and trusting your instincts can make all the difference. He didn't know when or where, but he was sure of one thing: his path would cross with Nathaniel's again. And when it did, he'd be ready. Until then, he would keep doing what he always did, fighting for the truth, no matter how dark the shadows around it might be.